Hey guys, Santoli here with another tier list video for post DOOD. I know everyone's making those reaction videos where they go, "Oh my god, the ban list is insane," and it was a decent sized ban list, but we're gonna skip all the emotional reactions and just get straight into the content about what decks should we be playing next format. Keep in mind we still do have a few weeks till DOOD, so just accordingly if you have regional the weekends in between. But otherwise, we're talking about post DOOD and what the meta will look like for YCS Lille and YCS Anaheim, and the one that's in South America as well. I can't remember what that is. Anyways, starting with some decks from last format. Vanquish Soul. So this is arguably the best deck of last format, if not the best deck, the second best deck if you think Yummy was better. It took a massive hit in the form of 2 Raisins as well as 2 Sacred Souls, and I see a lot of people still talking about how this deck is still very good. You just replace the consistency cards and it still has a lot of gas and doesn't really have much of the issues going in. This deck is completely unplayable right now. I'm just going to say this right now. The biggest issue with Vanquish Soul last format was the consistency already. And so not only are you hitting the weakness of the deck even further, there's nothing really good to replace it with. The 2 Raisins and the 2 Sacred, there's nothing good to replace it. There's no, I can just slot in these other cards. Drendel is not a replacement at all. It's not an attribute. It's very rarely going to resolve. Smallwood's fine, but people are already leaning away from them. And the biggest issue is just even some of your other stars now just got so much worse. Like Holy Sue is a significantly worse card now because you're not going to be drawing Vanquish Souls enough to actually be able to trigger turn 0. So maybe you do have a fire in it. Like it's not a way to summon it out early. So turns where you're going to turn 0 Holy Sue are a lot less. Turn 1 Holy Sue is still not that good. Yes, you get the ability to have the Canine cards, the new one as an extra starter, but it doesn't actually get you to engine enough. The top decks, as we'll see in a second, are all hand traps decks. And so if you have one play that lets you get to a Surge, potentially dig for a Vanquish Soul card, and they have 2 hand traps, you're not getting there. You're not going to be able to play. There's other issues with the deck that come online as well. Is that going second is so much worse because Stake was one of your best extenders. Raisin puts so much pressure on the board immediately. Another issue is that once Raisin gets into the grave, you have to keep careful management of it and always add it back to your hand. If you add it back to your hand, that means you don't have the ability to summon another one from deck with Sue. Also, drawing Sue and Raisin turn 0 is also so much worse because now it's no longer, oh, there's my fire for Sue. I'm able to summon another Raisin from the deck. Nope, you have to summon a Mad Love, which just feels so much worse. The consistency was the biggest issue. It's just been made 1,000 times worse with these hits. Other issues as well with the building feels bad because you don't know whether you want to play a large Vanquish Soul count to actually make the Vanquish Soul cards live, or a small count, in which case then it's like, why are we playing them at all? Because they're just going to be bricks most of the time. I think this deck's awful. I think we'll have some success just early on because people are going to force the deck to be successful, kind of like Snake Eye after that September ban list last year where people were like, oh, this is the best deck. Everyone played it. It barely topped. I think it will get over the finish line because of that. People just playing it. But I think this deck really got the nail in the coffin from this last ban list. I'll also say I'm not particularly a fan of how hard they hit this deck, even though I moved on from it. I think Sue was a problem card with the deck. Going first, yes, the deck did a lot, but I don't think it needed quite that murdering. I think just hitting Sue to 1 and preventing that high roll and going second was the way to hit the deck. And then, it's going first was good, and maybe it needed to hit down again in the future, but I didn't need the absolute murder I got from this ban list. Moving on to what I think the best decks of the next format will be is Draco Tale. I think this deck had a good showing last format. I think it's very difficult to pilot because it's so low to the floor. But I won a regional with it. It felt very, very good there, especially against all the decks that were not VS. And now its worst matchup of the format is completely murdered. VS is not going to be a good deck, and now it's okay. All your bad matchups are gone, and you just have the ability to feast on the yummy that's remaining as well as the other decks that are there. I think this is going to be the best deck going forward. I don't think we'll have the highest representation because, like I said, it is a lower to the floor deck, which I think people kind of avoid to play in general. But I think if you choose low in the deck and you play it optimally, it will be have an amazing matchup against pretty much everything in the format and is the go-to deck and the deck to beat when you learn those decks. All right, next up is Mitzu. Mitzu is the other deck I think is going to be the top deck of the format. I think these two are the best decks. Everything else is going to be lower than them. I think Mitzu didn't get hit at all. Yes, I think the Razor version got hit with X, and you can't use Feral Imps to get to Mitzu cards. So you're just going to be playing this pure. But I think pure Mitzu is fine. I think it uses Breakers really effectively. I think Impulse is a great card in the format. I think it grinds very well. I think it's just very, very good into Yummy and some of the other high tier threats. It's board while not particularly insane. It's IP plus interruption. It's just all the follow up you have to deal with that becomes very oppressive for decks to try and grind with. And same with Draco Tale. It's kind of these decks function very the same where neither of these boards look insane, but they both have very, very phenomenal engine pushers into boards once you use a single hand trap or a single breaker to weaken the boards. Then you just get into grind games where it's just very, very oppressive to deal with Mitsu cards in the grind game. Some people may say Mitzu is better than Draco Tale. I think these decks are pretty comparable. I think if you build to beat Draco Tale, you will have it, or build to beat Mitzu with Draco Tale, you will have a decent Mitzu matchup. But overall, I think that the matchup's pretty skillful. I think these are pretty close to 50-50 in terms of playing against each other. So I think swapping these is fine. But I do think these two are the best decks going forward. I think they are just, there's nothing overpowered to punish them. And then once again, the grind game, both these decks are just super, super good at trying to grind. And it's really hard to knock them off the grind once they start going. Some other new decks coming out. So one is Sulfur Core. This deck got new support. I'm not going to talk about it much. It topped it a little bit in the OCG. I think these cards are awful. This is a very me style deck. I really like the fairy cards because it lets you play cards like Orange Light, and once you start playing Orange Light, you can play other stuff like Shufflers. Discard them. Cool synergies there. But I think the end board's just awful. I think it just like doesn't do enough. The cards are really low quality. Even the new ones, like they do a lot, but they don't actually end on anything, which I think is the problem with it. Next up is DDD. I think this is a hype up deck. I'm putting this in fine decks. I think the biggest problem with it is it just has an issue with large amounts of chummy. Joel isn't amazing for this deck to deal with as well. It also has a non-engine issue where I don't think the engine pushers are quite real enough into some of the decks. Like when you look at Mitzu or Dragon Tail playing and starting to, resolve their effects and start playing, they're immediately just putting pressure on the opponent and they're removing stuff. The DDD deck doesn't have quite that ability. Yes, this deck can, just FTK when it goes first, and this full combo and board. It's not true FTK, but the damn board is really unbreakable. It just doesn't matter. I don't think it gets there enough through chummies and through fair hand traps. I think it's playable by all means, but I don't think it's going to have any overwhelming amount of success. Next up, we have Pure Razor. So this is the Dodo Razor. It lost an X. It didn't lose much else from the Pure deck. I think this deck was already falling out of favor, and X is its best lead, so it does get hurt there. Again, I think it's still playable. It's still a functional deck. Like the Dodo cards still are at its ceiling to that. You can replace the consistency with X. You can play more small worlds or not. But it's gotten to the point where a lot of cards it's playing are just inefficient, as well in a hand trap form. I don't think it's insane. So if you love the deck, it is functional, but I would not recommend it by any means. Next up, we have Fiendsmith deck. So this is just kind of talking about the Fiendsmith engine as opposed to specific Fiendsmith deck. And a lot of people are kind of going back to it and going, oh, we got Lacrima back. And as someone who's played on Master Duel a lot, yes, Lacrima is a very, very good card. We still have that on Master Duel, and it does help facilitate things. But overall, I don't think this really changes the format at all. One of the problems is that Mitsu is going to be one of the best decks, so I think Bistros are a very, very valid strategy, or other targeted graveyard hate, and Fiendsmith just suffers from this collateral damage. I don't think you should be aiming to play Fiendsmith decks unless it's something very specific and you think the other engine that works with it is going to be very good. Keep in mind that the Fiendsmith engine is a lot less splashable now because we don't have Closed Moon. We do have Exciton or other ways of bridging, so like something like Fiendsmith Gunblighters. I think it can function there, but overall, I would not be looking to play the Fiendsmith engine unless there's a bigger purpose to why you're playing it. Next up, we have Gem Knights. So this main version is the blind second version. I'm going to say I think this deck is actually really good. I'm going to put this as runner-up. One of the biggest problems with this deck is you don't actually have a good game plan for going first now. There really isn't much of an end board for Gem Knights. You can't Proto Stock. I mean, you can, but the format's too diverse where it's not really a viable strategy. And Dice Masters is gone. And so the biggest problem is going first, you kind of have to have that solved still, like what we're trying to do. Maybe you do just do Gem Knight stuff, summon a bunch of bodies and try living. I'm not really sure, but overall, I think this deck is absolutely phenomenal going second. I think both these decks are very hard to, beat in the grind game, but Gem Knights is one of those decks where it's just like, I'm going to go Breaker, 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 and then I'm going to activate a Gem Knight card, and they will die. This deck is just Shining Tempai, and I think it is super well positioned. This thing's super well positioned in these decks. I think super well positioned to a lot of the other decks that are going to be top. A lot of the top decks right now are more mid-rangey decks, and so when you're just playing Breaker, 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 and then engine piece, they will explode. Like I said, the problem is we need to figure out what to do going first with this deck. I think if this deck has a go first plan that is actually very viable, it may even go up here. But until then, I'm keeping it as a run-up decks. But this deck is a very, very scary deck, and I think if someone takes the time to learn the deck, this can by all means have success. Have a successful run at a tournament, winning an event, even going deep in YCSs. Next up, we have Yummy. So there's a reason I did not put Yummy in the best decks. I'm going to put it as a top of run-up. This is the third best deck of the format, and the big problem is that it just has awful matchups into both these decks. The Herald going to 1 is massive because now once I clear the Herald and Draco Tale, I don't have to worry with the Herald for the rest of the game, and the Herald was the biggest problem with the deck. Once you get into a grind game with this deck, you can feel very comfortable into Yummy, grinding with it, and both these decks, like I said earlier, Mitzu and Draco Tale, are very good at just playing through boards with engine, and Yummy's board is something that can be played through. You eat the Herald, somehow you get into a grind game, and your engine just, I'm referring to the top decks, are just better than Yummy in the grind game. I think that it's not that much worse. I don't think Yummy's unplayable into Mitzu or Draco Tale, but I think it's just an uphill battle for both those matchups. I'm not going to put Yummy up here in the best decks just because how bad they are. But I do think it is a great hand trap deck. It still has a very solid plan. Your Bane School sucks, but this is an example unlike VS where your replacements, are just more Yummy cards. I think those are fine. replacements in the sense that the deck still functions. You can just play more of those cards that aren't being school and have a way of comboing that way. Those are the ceiling a little bit, but I think it's fine at least. That way, it is the third best deck, but I'm putting it below these just because of the matchup spread. Next up, we have Lunite. This is a deck that is topping a lot in the OCG, and the biggest problem with it I have in the TCG is that, well, I think I have a problem with it in the OCG as well, but it's not really being affected by it there, is that this deck just doesn't have any half boards. The best decks right now, maybe not Mitzu, but among these two decks are hand trap decks, and so if you get hand trapped to death as Lunite, there's no half board you're entering. There's no plan B where it's like, oh, I'm going to end on this monster because this end board I have like 2-3 interruptions, 2-3 hand traps. No, it's like you make Liger or you're ending on like a Babushka, which is not real against basically any of the top decks. And so that's the biggest problem with it is that when you get hand trapped to death, I think you just automatically lose. It's a very feast or famine deck. I don't like this style deck. I will respect it enough. I will put it in good decks. I think it has some success. I do think as well is it's good going second into a lot of the decks, where you can push through with engine or like 1-2 breakers and good engine. So I will give it credit there. I'm not going to say it's lower than good decks, but I don't want to put much higher because, like I said, the feast or famine playstyle is not something I really like, and I think that just leads to getting variance out of tournament very easily. Next up, we have Malice. So they lost a Dormouse, which is another one-card star. They also lost Splash Mage. All your combo lines are worse. I think this deck still functions, but similar to Razel, I think it's just kind of gotten hit enough where it's like there's not much justification to play it. The other thing is like, yes, you can play other cards, you can play cash cards, you can play striker cards to help increase the consistency and like have your 2-card combo now, but it's just you're lowering the card quality of the deck so much. I think there are just better decks that do what it's trying to do. Now, if you love Malice, it's still functional by all means. I think it will still top a little bit, but I don't think it's has much of a reason to go and play the deck other than the fact that you love it. Next we have Pure Canine. I'm just gonna say this now. I think this deck is awful. I see people testing a lot, and the big thing is like you do not have any number of stars that actually make sense to your deck. Like the deck is just overall bad. Like you don't have large amount of stars. You have the new normal summon, the ice Razel of the Canine cards, and you have Case to search that. You have Joe Clay's 2-card combos, but beyond that, it's like what are your other stars? Like we're playing 7th Tachyon or other nonsense to be able to do Canine cards, and the other problem is that the Canine combo isn't insane in any way, shape, or form. Like it's you have your rank up into a pop, into a werewolf whip, into with Nash Knight. Maybe you're ending on IP, but beyond that, it's like these are all very breakable. Like you end with that canine board and your opponent goes activate Mitsurugi Ritual, like you do not feel good at all. Their problem is while your board is breakable, you don't have this insane follow-up that the other decks that have breakable boards offer. You're not having this grind game that is insane. The grind game in the deck is pretty underwhelming. I think it's just there's nothing really exceptional about this deck at all. And I don't really understand the reason to play it or reason why it's getting any hype at all. It's not having much success in the OCG. I'm just going to put in don't play these. I think the deck is awful. Don't touch it. Next up, we have Kishon, and Kishon is another deck that got hit on the ban list. I don't think it needed to get hit. I think Dice Smash was enough of a hit, but it did get hit. The one thing I will say is, unlike VS, I think this deck is actually still functional. I'm going to put it in good decks. The reason I still think it's functional is because you can actually just change the number of starters, and yes, inclusion is one of the better starters, but you can play a higher Kishon package and be happy with it. Like I said, you're lowering the power level of the deck a bit, but you're not killing it. There are actual replacements in the form of just playing more Kishon cards that are inclusion. The other thing is that I think this deck does actually synergize well with the canine cards. Trying to play kind of a canine, pure canine deck in Vanquish Soul feels really awful because your lines are like you go into Scrooger, which feels really bad. With this going into Riverstorm, I think is a bit more natural. And so, like I said, you lost a bit of the power level of the deck, but I think it still has enough of a card pool that is good to justify playing Christian cards. And I think it does solve a lot of issues with the pure canine deck, which is that your end board's a lot better. It facilitates a grind game, as well as just scrying Christian cards are really good. So I will keep it there in good decks. Next up, we have some OX of last format, so Momento and Merill. I think the biggest problem with Momento is usually I rate this deck pretty high. The problem with it right now is this deck's actually bad into fair hand traps. And unfortunately, Draco Tale and Yami are both fair hand trap decks, so I'm going to put this in fine decks. Like I said, you can play this deck. It's not particularly bad. And it does have half boards. So it doesn't have quite the Lunite problem, but I think there's just too many games where you get fair hand trap to death and you can't function that way. I also think while your in-engine pushes are very good, I think it can struggle against some of the end boards there, where it's pretty hard to kill Mitzu or Draco Tale with just all engine or like one breaker that the Memento allows, and then you get into a grind game with them. And these decks can outgrind Memento. Memento is a very good engine deck, but it's not quite good enough to compete with the grinding kings up here. Next up, Mermos. I think this is kind of similar to what I said for Memento. It has a problem with fair hand traps. I'll put it in fine decks. It's functional, but there's not much of a reason to play either of those two decks unless you absolutely love it. We have the MST deck next. So this is a new deck coming out on DOOD. It has not had much success in the OCG. I'm going to do, my normal Santoli thing, which I'm going to do completely random pick for one of the new coming decks and say, hey, I like this deck. I think it's pretty decent. And this is what it's going to be for this tier list. I think this deck's actually really good. I think when you look at the cards in a vacuum, all the cards are super high quality. Like all your level 3s are searchers. They're all starters. They all summon it going first for free. They're just a free special from hand. The deck has very good grind game. There's a lot of high value cards in the form of quick plays. They're letting you deck thing really easy. You have the draw 2, and with the Destiny draw of the archetype. And I think that this deck just needs to get solved. This is not a deck I'm going to be looking at for West Anaheim at all, but I think post Anaheim, I'm going to spend a fair bit of time on this deck trying to make it work. And like I said, I think the card quality of these cards is just too high for this deck not to function. Yes, this is kind of the Santoli pick of the tier list, where it's like, yeah, no one else is going to put this here and say the MST deck is good. But like I said, I think there's a lot to be explored with this deck, and I think it should come out as a functioning deck that is able to compete at least somewhat with the decks up here. Next up, we have Orcus. So one of my complaints earlier with the Fiendsmith cards were the fact that it's going to be a bestial format or graveyard hate format because of the prevalence of Mitzu. Um, I think with Orcus is that it would suffer from this, other than the fact that it just doesn't. And so this is kind of a weird statement to make, but even though it looks like Orcus should get hit by a lot of this graveyard hate, it really doesn't, because when you're banishing from the graveyard, you're putting in the banish zone, which Orcus still interacts with fine. And so I think the active Orcus cards actually positions it pretty well. I think Joel pop up a bit more in the format, which Orcus is amazing into. I think the Bishops and Graver hate it's fine too, surprisingly. And the biggest thing is Lance is going to leave side decks, which is this deck's Bane. And so I think it actually gets a bit of a buff from last format. I'm gonna put this in good decks. I don't really know what the deck list should look like. Same with an MST, where it's like both these decks are kind of just they should in theory be decent. But I don't know what they'll look like right now. I'm not sure if you're playing a pure Orcus version. Maybe mixed with the Canine cards just to get the River Stormer. I'm not sure, but I think those cards are super high quality. I also think that this is one of the few decks where if you're trying to actually grind versus Mitzu or Draco Tale or Yummy, you're comfortable getting into a grind game. The Orcus deck grinds so exceptionally well, and once you get going, it can be very obnoxious to get to. Like I said, though, I think the list needs to be solved a bit further, but I do expect it to have decent results to some level. Next up, we have Sky Striker. This is another deck that's performing super well in the OCG, and I think it's a good deck in the TCG as well. I'm just going to put it in kind of run-up category. The biggest issues with this deck is it kind of just loses to itself. It has this weird syndrome of like it wants to go first and second at the same time, but there's problems going both directions. It also gets some collateral damage from other cards in the format. I think Red Tallying Sea will go more in the format now that Draco Tale is one of the top tier decks. I also think Droll will go in the format because Mitsu's on the top tier decks, and Sky Striker gets hit by both of them. It doesn't really auto lose to both of them, but does take collateral damage there. There's also games where you want to go first, where you just want to blow out your opponent and like they activate Purge, and you're looking at your hand, it's like, wow, I don't really have a good setup, and then you just get blown out that way. Lightning Storm's at 3. I think Breakers will become somewhat prevalent, and so Sky Striker will get hit that way. But I think it's just such a clean and efficient deck, as well as just so much choices in the tech cards that you play in the format that I think it's the power level of the deck is solid enough to justify putting it there. And last up, we have Kashtira Genesis. I'm going to put this in the fine deck category. I don't know where. I think the fine deck category is all kind of the same. The one thing I will say with this deck is it grinds very well. It can actually grind versus both these decks. I think Birth is an absolutely insane card versus Mitzu, as well as a lot of the other top tier decks up here. The Genesis cards are just very good into grinding. Kashtira Unicorn is absolutely insane into Yummy. So it is by all means a functional deck. I just don't think the power level of it justifies putting it any higher than it is. Okay, so here is the tier list for post DOOD. Like I said, I think that these two decks kind of stand on top of everything else, and then lots of choices down here. These decks are all functional, other than the ones down here. But there's not much reason to play them unless you really like them. Let me know what your thoughts are on the meta for DOOD and what you think of this ban list overall. And let me know if you think that there's any things I've really just messed up on. Like I said, this is kind of going into unexplored territory because we got a completely different meta with VS being hit than the OCG. So, I think a lot of predictions will be all over the place. I'm interested to see what other people think. Till next time, guys.